pretty remarkable. You know, there are times when I've forgotten my lunch and wish that I just might be able to pull off something like this myself. But there very seldom has been a little boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish right there when I needed something to eat. And then, wait a minute, it wasn't just enough for one more. What, 5,000? Well, chances are nobody took a census on the group, but even so, let's put it this way. It was a good-sized crowd, and 5 loaves and 2 fish are kind of incidental to what's going on at the moment. There they were. What do you do with a group that size? Well, remember those WWJD bracelets and pins and everything? You've got to be remembering back around 1970 or 1980 but there they were. What would Jesus do? WWJD. And Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fish and fed the crowd. However big it was, he fed that crowd. God cared, Jesus cared, the disciples cared. It happened. Sometimes what happens is not what we expect. And sometimes you just kind of need to be prepared to expect the unexpected. And there's no way to prepare for that except to trust. There was a German schoolmaster who every morning when he started class, oh, and by the way, he would start class with prayer. That was in Germany, and that was back then. Started class with prayer, and then he would bow to the students before beginning his teaching. Finally, someone really noticed that and asked him why he bowed to the students. He said, well, I never know what any one of them might become. Might become. Teaching isn't just an event, and learning is not just an event, is it? It is an activity that sets in process a becoming, developing, growing, expanding, a new vision of what the world is around us. And strange things happen. So that schoolmaster was looking at, these students are important because they're right here and I have an opportunity to teach them now. The schoolmaster affirmed the present, but then bowed to the students because of what that learning might inspire, direct, motivate, become. He not only affirmed the present, but honored the future, and the future that he was sure was coming for each of them. Oh, by the way, one year, one of the students in his class was named Martin Luther. Good reasoning on the schoolmaster's part. Yeah. What will God do with 5 loaves and 2 fish? And a kid, and a teacher, and a future? Yes, God in action. The only real constant is change. we want the students to change. We want our children to grow. And since we're children of God, we're invited never to stop growing. Well, it'd be better if I stopped growing physically a little bit, but not to stop in our maturing and becoming more aware of God's presence, being conscious of God's call, what God is directing, to what God is inviting, what is possible. 5 loaves and 2 fish. We're crying out loud. But in the hand of Jesus, there was a little kid who no doubt had been sent to the deli to get lunch for the family, or maybe the whole day's food, and got caught up in the crowd and followed out on the hillside a long way from home. The kid had nothing, 5 loaves and 2 fish, a poor person's food. Barley loaf was so common that it was looked down on, even to the point of being kind of turn up your nose at it kind of stuff. It's kind of like tomato aspect a whole bunch of years ago that I put in the garbage. You know, a barley loaf is not something that you really want for lunch. But if it's all you can afford, it's food. Ordinary meal. But in the hand of Jesus, it becomes extraordinary and something different, because Jesus touched it, blessed it, gave thanks, and handed it out. And how many people were fed? Ordinary food. But in the hand of Jesus, it becomes something very unusual, special. God's picture of what life with Christ is like. In Jesus' hand, that 5 loaves and 2 fish really becomes a sacrament, doesn't it? Jesus did the sacramental thing that any good Jewish young man would do. He gave thanks, broke it, gave it to the disciples to pass out. That was a ritual, Seder ritual. It's a ritual that we reenact now in our communion service. We don't multiply the bread and the loaf, but we act out what God did at the Exodus in the wilderness with manna from heaven. It wasn't fish, it was quails, but hey, it's food, it's meat fiber type thing. Same difference. And by the way, that 5 barley loaves and 2 fish became sacrament because it displayed to that crowd on the hillside exactly what God is like and how God works. For whatever it's worth or not worth, that's a seminary definition of a sacrament. An outward visible sign of an inward spiritual grace. Outward sign of an inward grace, action on the part of God. Something that looks very ordinary, but has profound meaning, just because it gives us a glimpse of what God is like. And we understand a little bit more. So we act out God's truth. In baptism, we act it out in communion, as Jesus acted out the Exodus on that hillside a long time ago, and 1,000 years after the Exodus happened. What a sign. What a meaning. How close God was. God present with those people, for them, and with them. Ordinary meal, but in God's hand became sacrament and fed, yes, physically, fed also emotionally, spiritually. And they discovered something. Now, people who aren't people of faith have tried to find ways to explain how this happened. How is not the question, really, is it? The question is, what happened and why? What happened? Food was multiplied. It was shared, became enough, adequate. And that's what ordinary stuff like Jake becomes in God's hands. Enough, adequate. And what more really counts? Really. Jesus did it for you and for me, and for us to discover, to learn, to grow. Oh, and like those school children in the schoolmaster's class in Germany, to become God, recreation in Christ. Simple meal, easy, but so important for those folks. WWJD, what would Jesus, no, not what would Jesus do, but with that little wristband with a WWJD on it, what will Jesus do? With Partnership Place, with our two churches together. What will Jesus do with me this afternoon and tomorrow and this week? WWJD, Jesus will. And when we bow to God, God looks to us to honor God in the week ahead with whom we serve, how we serve, with the daring with which we serve, the strength of your faith and mine, the power of God moving through each one of us. God with us, not by Galilee, but by Mechanic Street and Michigan Ave and wherever. God with, not just with us, God with you and with me, each of us in the week ahead. Power, vision, and a possibility that's waiting to happen if we dare to trust. That's the key.